Her ex took everything in the divorce but forgot the old tool barn her father hid in her name. What he thought was worthless turned out to be the beginning of everything. If you've ever had to start over from nothing, if you've ever felt like you lost it all, then this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button if you believe in second chances, because this is where mine began. The silence was the loudest thing in the house. It wasn't a peaceful silence, the kind that settles over a home when the day is done. It was the hollow, echoing silence of a place that has been emptied, not just of its furniture but of its life. My footsteps clicked on the polished marble floors, a sound that felt alien, intrusive. This had been our house, Mark's and mine, now it was just his. The divorce papers had called it an equitable distribution of assets. I called it a surgical removal of my existence. He got the house, the cars, the investment accounts, the art collection he'd curated with such meticulous, cold precision. I got a single checking account with enough money to cover first and last month, rent on a small apartment across town, and a restraining order against my own memories. I was standing in the cavernous living room, staring at the perfectly spaced, ghostly rectangles on the walls where our pictures used to hang. My pictures, pictures of my mother, my father, my childhood. He'd had his lawyer pack them into a single sterile cardboard box that now sat by the door. My entire history reduced to a 20-pound parcel. The air smelled of Lemson's-scented cleaner and something else, something metallic and final. The cleaning crew had been thorough. They'd scrubbed away every trace of me, every fingerprint, every stray hair, every lingering note of the perfume I used to wear. It was as if I had been a temporary tenant, a ghost who had overstayed her welcome, and now the property had been cleansed for the next occupant. Mark had been clear. He wanted it all done by 5 o'clock. His new life was scheduled to begin at 5:01, and he was a man who valued punctuality above all else, including, as it turned out, the 14 years we'd spent together. I ran a hand along the cool, smooth surface of the fireplace mantel, a piece of reclaimed wood we'd found in an antique shop upstate. I remembered the day we bought it, the way the sun had streamed through the dusty shop window, the smell of old wood and beeswax, the easy laughter we shared. It felt like a scene from someone else's movie. The woman in that memory was a stranger to me now, soft and trusting and naive. The woman standing here today was quieter, sharper, forged in the fires of legal depositions and quiet betrayals. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a jarring intrusion into the mausoleum-like quiet. I almost ignored it. It was probably my sister, calling to check in again with that worried, pitying tone she'd adopted ever since the separation began. I didn't think I could handle any more pity today, but I glanced at the screen anyway. The caller ID was a name I hadn't seen in years, Arthur Davies, attorney at law. Mr. Davies had been my father's lawyer, a quiet, older man with kind eyes and a handshake as firm and reliable as old leather. He'd handled my father's will after the accident, a simple affair that left me with a modest life insurance policy and my dad's beat-up Ford pickup truck. I hadn't spoken to him since. A knot of cold dread tightened in my stomach. Why would he be calling me now? Had there been a problem with the estate after all this time? Was there some forgotten debt, some final insult the universe had decided to hurl at me on this, the most humiliating day of my life? I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the ignore button, but something made me answer. A flicker of loyalty to my dad, maybe. Hello, my voice was raspy. Alara? Alara Vance? Mr. Davies' voice was just as I remembered it, calm, measured, a low baritone that felt like a steadying hand. It's Arthur Davies. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. I let out a short, bitter laugh. Mr. Davies, you have no idea. There was a pause on the other end. I'm very sorry to hear that, my dear. I truly am. The reason I'm calling, it concerns your father. It concerns something he set up for you a long time ago. I leaned against the wall, the cold marble seeping through my thin sweater. I don't understand. His estate was settled years ago. Yes, it was, he said. This is separate. It's a small trust he established for you. It was structured to remain dormant, invisible really, until one of two conditions was met. Your 30th birthday, or a legal finding of, and I'm quoting the document here, extreme personal or financial hardship. Alara, your divorce filing triggered the second clause. My head was spinning. A trust? My dad was a mechanic. He worked 60 hours a week at his garage, his hands permanently stained with grease. He smelled of oil and metal and hard work. He wasn't the kind of man who set up trusts. We never had that kind of money. I think you have the wrong person, I said, my voice barely a whisper. No, Alara, I don't, he replied, his tone gentle but firm. There's a property. It's not much, mind you. Just a few acres and an old barn out in Stafford County. But it's yours, free and clear. Your father made sure of it. A property, a barn, out in the middle of nowhere. It made no sense. But as I stood there, surrounded by the ruins of the life I had built, a life that had been taken from me piece by piece, the idea of something, anything, that was truly mine felt like a lifeline. When can I see you? I asked, my voice suddenly clear and strong. I can be there in an hour, he said. And just like that, at the very end of everything, a new door I never knew existed had just creaked open, Mr. Davies' office was a relic from another time. It was tucked away on the second floor of a brick building downtown, the kind with a real wooden glass door that chimed softly when you opened it. The air inside smelled of old paper, leather-bound books, and faint pipe tobacco. There wasn't a computer in sight. Instead, the walls were lined with shelves groaning under the weight of legal tomes, and his massive oak desk was an organized landscape of manila folders and neatly stacked documents. He greeted me with that same kind smile I remembered, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He didn't mention my divorce, didn't offer condolences. He just gestured to a worn leather armchair and said, "Please, Alara, sit." He moved with a deliberate, unhurried grace, a stark contrast to the frantic, high-strung lawyers Mark had employed. As he settled into his own chair, the old leather sighing under his weight, he slid a thick folder across the desk towards me. "Your father," he began, "was a very forward-thinking man. He was also a very private man." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. That was my dad. Quiet, steady, with a deep current of something, sadness, I always thought, running beneath his calm surface. He never talked much about his past, or about my mother who had died when I was just a baby. He just worked, provided, and loved me in his own silent, steadfast way. "When you were born, Mr. Davies, he came to me. He'd just bought a small piece of land, 5 acres out past the old quarry. It was cheap, nobody wanted it. There was nothing on it but a dilapidated old barn. He told me he wanted to put it in a trust for you, under your birth name, Alara Vance." "Not my name, his name?" I asked, confused. "My father's name was Miller. No, your mother's family name, Vance. He was adamant about that. He said it was important for you to have something that was just yours, separate from him, separate from anyone else you might meet in your life. He wanted it to be a safety net, a place to land if you ever fell." I stared at him, my mind struggling to process the information. A secret piece of land, a secret name. Why didn't he ever tell me? "Ghost Acre," Mr. Davies said with a faint smile. He said its power was in its secrecy. If no one knew about it, no one could ever try to take it from you. He structured the trust very carefully. It wouldn't show up on any standard asset search. It was tied to your birth certificate and social security number, but shielded from public record. In the eyes of the world, and specifically in the eyes of any potential creditor or, let's say, an opportunistic spouse's legal team, this property doesn't exist. The words hit me like a physical blow. An opportunistic spouse, my father, the quiet mechanic, had seen Mark coming 14 years before I'd even met him. He had anticipated a day like today, a day when I would be left with nothing, and he had built me a lifeboat in secret. The foresight, the fierce, silent protectiveness of it made my throat ache. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, hot and sudden. Mr. Davies seemed to understand. He pushed a box of tissues across the desk and gave me a moment, busying himself with tidying an already tidy stack of papers. He was a good man. "Alara," he said softly without looking at me. "He loved you more than anything." I finally found my voice. "What do I have to do?" "Nothing. It's already done. The trust was dissolved the moment the court finalized your divorce decree. The deed was automatically transferred into your name. It's yours. I have the keys right here." He reached into a desk drawer and pulled out a small, heavy object. It wasn't a modern key. It was old, made of tarnished iron, the kind you'd see in a fairy tale. It was large and ornate, with a complex toothed bit. He dropped it into my palm. It was cold and solid, a tangible piece of a past I never knew existed. "There's also this," he said, lifting a dusty cardboard file box from the floor beside his desk. "Your father left this with me for safekeeping. He said I was to give it to you, along with the key on the day the trust was opened." I looked at the box. It was sealed with yellowed packing tape. My name was written on the top in my father's unmistakable blocky scrawl. "Thank you," I whispered, my fingers closing around the cold iron of the key. "Thank you, Mr. Davies." "Don't thank me," he said, his gaze steady and kind. "Thank your father. He built you an ark, Alara. Now you just have to find out what's inside." I walked out of his office holding the key in the box, feeling like I was in a dream. The city streets seemed loud and garish, the people rushing past me, oblivious to the tectonic shift that had just occurred in my world. I had walked in there a victim, a woman erased. I was walking out in air. I didn't know what I was inheriting exactly. A rundown barn and 5 acres of weeds, most likely. But it was more than just land. It was a message from my father sent across the years. It was a secret, a legacy, and a beginning. The drive out to Stafford County was like traveling back in time. The sleek, glass and steel landscape of the city gave way to sprawling suburbs, then to smaller towns with quaint main streets, and finally, to winding country roads flanked by dense forests and rolling fields. The farther I drove, the more the tension in my shoulders began to ease. I left the polished, artificial world of Mark behind with every passing mile. The sky was a vast, bruised purple canvas, heavy with the promise of rain. A light drizzle began to fall, pattering softly against the windshield of my dad's old truck. The rhythmic thump of the wipers was a soothing counterpoint to the anxious hum in my chest. The truck itself was a comfort. It still smelled faintly of him, a mix of motor oil, sawdust, and the cheap air freshener he always hung from the rearview mirror. Driving it felt like borrowing a piece of his strength. I had fought to keep it in the divorce. Mark had called it a worthless piece of junk, but it was one of the few things I had refused to surrender. Now I knew why. It was the only thing that could take me home to a place I'd never been. My memories of my father were a collection of sensory snapshots. The rough, calloused feel of his hand holding mine, the low rumble of his voice when he'd read to me at night, the way he could fix anything, a broken toy, a leaky faucet, a sputtering engine, with a patient, methodical calm. But he was a closed book in so many ways. I knew he loved me, but I didn't really know him. I didn't know his dreams, his fears, the stories that made him who he was. He'd always deflected personal questions with a gentle joke or a change of subject. "The past is the past, Ellie Bell," he used to say. "We look forward." Now it seemed the only way forward was to go back. I clutched the old iron key on the passenger seat beside me. It felt impossibly heavy, weighted with the secrets of the man I was only just beginning to meet. What kind of man buys a secret piece of land? What was he hiding from? Or what was he hiding for me? The thought was both terrifying and thrilling. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of something other than grief or anger. It was curiosity, a fragile, tentative hope. The directions Mr. Davies had given me were simple, almost archaic. Take Route 7 past the old quarry, turn left at the split oak tree, and follow the dirt road till it ends. There were no street names, no GPS coordinates. It was a route from a different era. I passed the quarry, a gaping, man-made canyon in the earth, and then I saw it, a massive oak tree, its trunk split down the middle by a long Ago lightning strike, yet still stubbornly, defiantly alive. I turned onto the dirt road. It was more of a suggestion of a road than a proper thoroughfare. 2 muddy ruts carved through a tunnel of overgrown trees. The truck bounced and swayed, its old suspension groaning in protest. Branches scraped against the windows like skeletal fingers. After about a mile, the road opened into a small clearing, and there it was, the barn. It was worse than I had imagined, and yet somehow more beautiful too. It was a classic gambrel-roofed structure, its siding weathered to a soft, silvery gray. The paint, what was left of it, was a faded, peeling red like a faint blush on an old woman's cheek. The roof on one side sagged dangerously, and the whole building seemed to be leaning into the wind, as if tired from standing for so long. The 5 acres were a sea of tall, wild grass, dotted with Queen Anne's lace and stubborn thistles. It was neglected, forgotten, and utterly, completely mine. I turned off the engine, and the silence rushed in, deeper and more profound than the silence in Mark's empty house. This wasn't an empty silence. It was filled with the whisper of the wind through the grass, the rustle of unseen creatures in the undergrowth, the gentle patter of the rain on the truck's roof. It was the sound of a place that was waiting. I stepped out of the truck, the damp earth soft under my boots. I took a deep breath. The air was clean and cool, smelling of rain, wet soil, and decaying leaves. It smelled real. I walked toward the barn, the box from Mr. Davies' office tucked under my arm, the iron key clutched tight in my hand. This was it. The Ark, my father's ghost acre. I was finally home. The main doors of the barn were huge, made of thick, cross-braced planks of wood held together by rusted iron hinges. A heavy chain and a massive, ancient-looking padlock secured them. But beside the main doors was a smaller, man-sized entrance, and this was the one that matched the key in my hand. The keyhole was dark and clogged with rust and debris. I had to use a twig to clear it out before I could even attempt to insert the key. It slid in with a gritty, scraping sound. For a moment I thought it was stuck. I turned it, putting all my weight into it, my knuckles white. Nothing. It wouldn't budge. A wave of despair washed over me. To have come all this way, to have this one last thing, only to be locked out. It felt like a cruel cosmic joke. I leaned my forehead against the cool, rough wood of the door, fighting back tears of frustration. "Come on, Dad," I whispered to the empty air. "Don't do this to me, please." I took a deep breath, straightened up, and tried again. This time, I didn't just force it. I jiggled the key gently, feeling for the tumblers inside the lock, listening. I remembered my dad showing me how to pick a simple lock on my childhood diary once, telling me that force was rarely the answer. "You have to feel it," he'd said. "Listen to what it needs." So I listened. I felt a tiny give, a slight shift in the mechanism. I applied steady pressure, and then, with a deep groaning click that echoed in the quiet clearing, the lock turned. The door swung inward on protesting hinges, opening into a cavern of darkness. The air that rolled out was thick and musty, the smell of trapped time. It was a complex scent of dry rot, sawdust, engine oil, and something else, something faintly sweet and resinous, like pine sap. I stood on the threshold for a long moment, letting my eyes adjust to the gloom. Slowly, shapes began to emerge from the shadows. The interior of the barn was vast, much larger than it had appeared from the outside. The ceiling soared upwards into a cathedral of rafters, where dusty light filtered through grimy windows and cracks in the roof, illuminating swirling motes of dust like tiny captured stars. The space was packed but not cluttered. It was organized. Along one wall stood a massive workbench, its surface scarred with the marks of countless projects. Tools hung in neat, orderly rows on a pegboard behind it, saws of every size and shape. Hammers, chisels, planes, drills. They were old tools, the kind with worn wooden handles, polished smooth by years of use. In the center of the barn, several large objects were draped in heavy canvas tarps, their forms bulky and mysterious. Shelving units lined the other walls, filled with cans of varnish, boxes of nails and screws, and neatly coiled ropes and cables. This wasn't a storage shed. It was a workshop, a serious professional workshop. I stepped inside, my boots crunching on the dusty concrete floor. I ran my hand along the workbench. The wood was smooth and cool to the touch. This was where he had worked. This was where he had spent his secret hours. I could almost feel the echo of his presence in the quiet, the ghost of his focused silence. I set the box from Mr. Davies' office down on the bench and looked around, trying to reconcile this place with the man I thought I knew. My dad, the neighborhood mechanic, who fixed transmissions and changed oil. Who was this person, this secret craftsman? I walked over to one of the tarp-covered shapes and lifted a corner of the heavy canvas. Underneath was a piece of furniture, half-finished. It was a writing desk, I thought, made of a dark, richly grained wood I didn't recognize. The design was elegant and complex, with curved legs and intricate inlay work along the edges. It was a piece of art. I let the tarp fall back into place, my heart pounding. This changed everything. I crossed to the workbench and looked at the box, my name in his handwriting. With trembling fingers, I tore at the old packing tape. It was brittle and gave way easily. Inside, nestled in yellowed tissue paper, was a metal lockbox, the kind you'd use for petty cash, and a thick sealed manila envelope. My name was on the envelope, too. I picked it up. It felt heavy, substantial. This was it, the answers. I found an old wooden stool tucked under the bench, wiped the dust from its seat, and sat down. The only sounds were the drumming of the rain on the tin roof and the frantic beating of my own heart. I took a deep breath, broke the seal, and began to read. "My dearest Alara," the letter began. The handwriting was his, the same familiar, slightly clumsy block letters from birthday cards and notes left on the fridge, but the words, the tone, were from a man I had never met. "If you are reading this, then the worst has happened. Either I am gone, or your life has taken a turn so sharp that you needed this place. I pray it is the former, because the thought of you in pain is more than I can bear. But I know life is not always kind, and I am a man who believes in preparing for the storm. This barn, this land, this is my preparation for you. I know you have questions. I owe you a lifetime of answers, and I am so sorry that I have to give them to you in a letter. The man you knew as your father, the simple mechanic, was only half of the story. It was the truest half, the part of me that was just your dad, but it wasn't the whole of it. Before you were born, before I met your mother, I had a different life. I was a craftsman, a cabinet maker, a furniture designer. I wasn't just good at it, Ellie Bell. I was one of the best. I had to stop reading, my vision blurring. I pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes, trying to absorb the shock. A craftsman, one of the best. The writing desk under the tarp suddenly made a terrifying kind of sense. I continued reading. I had a business partner back then, a man named Silas Croft. He was the salesman, the face of the company. I was the artist, hidden away in the workshop. We were successful, very successful. We made custom pieces for wealthy clients, collectors, people with names you would recognize. The money was good, but I was naive. I trusted Silas completely. I let him handle the books, the clients, the finances. I just wanted to create, and then I met your mother. She was a light, Alara. She saw the man behind the sawdust. She made me want to be more than just a craftsman. She made me want to be a husband, a father. When we found out she was pregnant with you, I was the happiest man on earth. I went to Silas, told him I wanted to restructure our partnership, to build something real and lasting for my new family. That's when I discovered the truth. The letter shook in my hands. Silas had been cheating me for years. He had set up a second set of books, shell corporations, offshore accounts. He had been siphoning off the majority of our profits, leaving me with just enough to think the business was doing okay. He had stolen millions. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. He laughed. He told me I was a simple-minded artist, and that I should be grateful for what he'd given me. He said that every contract was in his name, every client relationship was his. I had no proof, no legal standing. He threatened me. He said if I ever went to the authorities or tried to expose him, he would ruin me, and he had the power to do it. He had connections, powerful friends who only knew his side of the story. Then your mother got sick. The doctors said it was aggressive, that the treatments would be expensive. I was trapped. I had no money, and the man who had stolen my life's work held all the cards. I had to make a choice. I could fight him, a fight I would almost certainly lose, and risk everything, including your mother's care. Or I could walk away. For her, for you, I walked away. I let him think he had won, that he had broken me. I took a job at a local garage. I became a mechanic. I buried the artist, the craftsman, and I did what I had to do to take care of my family. I was openly sobbing now, quiet, racking sobs that shook my whole body. The grief was immense, a physical weight in my chest. Grief for the father I never knew, for the life he had lost, for the secrets he had carried alone for all those years. The quiet sadness I had always sensed in him wasn't just sadness. It was the ghost of a stolen life. It was the weight of a sacrifice I never knew he'd made. I thought of him coming home every night, his hands black with grease, his back aching, and I felt a fresh wave of love and rage so fierce it left me breathless. He had given up his art, his passion, his name, all for us, for me, the letter continued. After your mother passed, all I had left was you. Protecting you became my only purpose. I started saving every spare dollar. I took on side work, cash jobs, fixing things for people after my shift. And I bought this land. It was my secret, my sanctuary. I came out here on weekends, on nights when the grief was too much to bear, and slowly, I started to build again, not for money, not for fame, just for me, for my soul. This barn, these tools, they were the only place in the world where I could be the man I was supposed to be. I built this for me, Alara, but I'm leaving it for you. It's not much, but it's built on a foundation of truth. It's a place where no one can lie to you or take from you what is rightfully yours. Inside the lockbox, you'll find the rest of the story. Be careful. Be smart. You are my daughter. You have the heart of your mother and the hands of your father. You are stronger than you know. All my love, Dad. I sat there on that dusty stool for what felt like an hour, the letter resting in my lap, the sound of the rain, a gentle elegy on the roof. The world had tilted on its axis. My father, the man I had mourned as a simple, good-hearted mechanic, was a fallen king, and this barn was his hidden kingdom. The anger I felt toward Mark, the sting of his betrayal, seemed to shrink in comparison to the colossal injustice my father had endured. Mark had taken a house, some furniture. Silas Croft had stolen a man's soul. I looked at my hands, they were soft manicured. Mark had liked them that way. But they were my father's hands in their shape, with long fingers made for careful, meticulous work. I had his hands. The thought was a revelation. I stood up and walked back to the workbench. The metal lockbox was waiting. My father's letter had been a map of the past, but he'd said the box held the rest of the story. I felt a surge of cold, clear purpose. This wasn't just about my own second chance anymore. This was about his. This was about justice. If you've ever discovered a secret that changed how you saw someone you loved, then you know the feeling that was coursing through me. It's a disorienting, heart-wrenching, and yet strangely clarifying experience. It's like a puzzle piece you never knew was missing has just been slid into place, and suddenly the entire picture makes a new kind of sense. It's a lonely feeling, and I want you to know you're not alone. We're building a community here for exactly these moments. So if this is hitting you, if you have a story about a hidden truth in your own family, please share it in the comments. Your story matters. The lock on the metal box was small and simple. One of the keys on the ring I'd found in my dad's truck fit perfectly. I turned it, and the lid popped open with a soft, metallic sigh. Inside, there was no money, no hidden treasure in the conventional sense. It was something far more valuable. The box was filled with documents. On top was a series of leather-bound journals. I opened the first one. It was a ledger. Page after page was filled with my father's neat, blocky handwriting, detailing every piece of furniture he had ever built in this barn. There were sketches in the margins, notes on wood types, joinery techniques, and finishing oils. But it was more than a technical journal. He had given each piece a name: the Eleanor desk for my mother, the Stargazer's chair, a rocking chair he'd built the year I became obsessed with astronomy, the Anniversary cabinet, a beautiful piece with intricate floral inlays. It was a secret history of his love for us, written in wood. Each entry was dated. He had continued to create, to pour his soul into his work, long after Silas Croft had tried to destroy him. Beneath the ledgers was a collection of photographs, high-quality prints showing his finished work in situ. The Eleanor desk sat in a sun-drenched library, a cup of tea steaming on its surface. The Stargazer's chair was on a wide porch overlooking a mountain range. These weren't just pieces of furniture, they were masterpieces. The craftsmanship was breathtaking. Each photo was labeled on the back with the client's name and the date of sale. He hadn't just been building for himself. He had been selling his work, quietly under a pseudonym, the Stafford Craftsman. He had rebuilt his career from the ashes, on his own terms, in secret. He had created a new identity, one that Silas Croft could never touch. And at the very bottom of the box, wrapped in oilcloth, was a final thin envelope. My hands were shaking as I opened it. It contained a single sheet of paper and a small labeled key. The paper was a signed, notarized affidavit from a man I'd never heard of, a former bookkeeper for the company my father had shared with Croft. The affidavit detailed, with damning precision, the fraudulent accounting practices, the shell corporations, the exact methods Silas had used to embezzle the money. It was the proof. The smoking gun my father had never been able to use. The bookkeeper, it seemed, had a crisis of conscience years later and had sought my father out to confess. My father had taken the confession, the proof, and he had buried it. He had chosen peace over war, my future over his own vindication. The key was labeled workbench. I looked at the massive, scarred workbench that dominated the wall. It was the heart of the workshop. I ran my hands along its underside, feeling for anything unusual. Near the right leg, my fingers brushed against a small keyhole, almost invisible in the dark wood. I inserted the key. It turned smoothly, and I heard a faint click. A section of the thick wooden top, disguised as a series of drawers, swung open like a hidden door. Inside the secret compartment lay my father's true legacy. It wasn't gold or cash. It was a stack of his design blueprints, dozens of them, rolled into tight scrolls and tied with twine. These were the designs for the pieces he had built, and for countless others he had only dreamed of. They were his intellectual property, his artistic soul committed to paper, and next to the blueprints was one last letter. Ilara, it said. This is your inheritance, not the land, not the barn. This my work, my name. The affidavit is there if you need it. Croft is an old man now. Perhaps justice is still possible, but that is your choice. You can sell this land. A developer will surely make you an offer one day. It would be the easy path. Or you can stay, you can build. The choice is yours, and whatever you decide, I will be proud of you. You have my hands. Ellie Bell, don't ever forget that. The choice. It hung in the dusty air of the barn, as real and solid as the workbench beneath my hands sell. I could take the money, get a nice apartment, start a new, comfortable life. No one would blame me. It would be the sensible thing to do, or stay. Stay with the ghosts and the dust and the legacy of a man I was only just getting to know. Stay and fight for his name. Stay and see if I truly did have his hands. I looked around the barn at the silent waiting tools, at the shrouded masterpieces, at the light cutting through the gloom. It wasn't a choice between selling and staying. It was a choice between who I had been, the woman who let her life be taken from her, and who I could become. I picked up one of my father's old hand planes. The wooden handle was worn smooth, shaped by his grip. It felt warm, alive in my palm. It fit perfectly. In that moment, standing in the heart of my father's secret world, I made my choice. I was staying. I was going to build. The days that followed were the hardest and most rewarding of my life. The first call I made was to Mr. Davies. I told him I was keeping the property and to refuse any and all offers. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and then he said, his voice thick with emotion, "Your father would be so proud, Ilara." His validation was the first stone in my new foundation. The work was overwhelming. The barn needed a new roof, new windows, and a thorough cleaning that felt more like an archaeological dig. I started with a broom and a shovel. I spent days just clearing out the layers of dust, dirt, and debris that had accumulated over the years. With every square foot of concrete I uncovered, I felt like I was reclaiming not just the space, but a piece of myself. I was sore, exhausted, and covered in grime from dawn till dusk. And I had never felt more alive. I started a routine. I'd wake with the sun, make a simple breakfast on a camp stove, and work until I could no longer see. I learned to use the tools. I started with simple repairs, fixing a broken shelf, reinforcing a wall stud. My first attempts were clumsy, my cuts uneven, but I was patient. I remembered my father's advice from the letter: listen to what it needs. I learned to listen to the wood, to the tools, to the quiet wisdom of the barn itself. My first trip into the nearby town of Stafford was a nerve-wracking affair. It was a small, tight-knit community where everyone knew everyone. I was an outsider. I needed supplies, so I went to the local hardware store, a wonderful old place that smelled of sawdust and metal. The man behind the counter was ancient, with a kind, weathered face and hands as gnarled as oak roots. "Help you, miss?" he asked, his voice a gravelly rumble. "I hope so," I said. "I'm fixing up the old barn out on the quarry road." His eyes widened slightly. "Miller's place? Haven't seen anyone out there in years. You his girl?" "I am," I said, a lump forming in my throat. "I'm Alara." He broke into a wide, gap-toothed grin. "Well, I'm Stan. I knew your daddy. Quiet fella, but a real artist with his hands. Used to come in here for special orders, rare woods. Always paid in cash. Said he had a project. I guess this was it." He looked me up and down, his eyes and hands. That small moment of connection, of validation from a stranger who had known a piece of my father's secret life, was worth more than all the money Mark had in his bank accounts. Stan became my guide, my mentor. He taught me the difference between a dovetail and a mortise and tenon joint. He helped me order the right lumber for the roof. He told me stories about my father, small anecdotes that filled in the missing pieces of the man I never knew. Through him I began to feel a sense of belonging, not just to the barn, but to the community. One crisp autumn afternoon, about 3 months after I'd moved into the small Airstream trailer I'd bought and parked next to the barn, I got a phone call. It was a crisp professional voice from a law firm in the city. "Am I speaking with Alara Vance?" the voice asked. "Yes." I said, my guard immediately up. "I represent the estate of the late Silas Croft." My blood ran cold. Late? Silas Croft was dead. "Croft passed away last month," the lawyer continued, "and in reviewing his extensive financial records, we've uncovered a rather irregular partnership agreement from several decades ago with a Mr. David Miller. As Mr. Miller's sole heir, we'd like to discuss a potential settlement to resolve this outstanding matter quietly and avoid any potential litigation against the estate." I held the phone, my knuckles white. The affidavit, my father's proof. They must have found some trace of the old company, realized the potential for a lawsuit, and were trying to cut it off at the pass. "I'll have my lawyer contact you," I said, my voice steady, channeling the calm pragmatism of Mr. Davies. I hung up the phone, a slow smile spreading across my face. It wasn't about the money. It was about the name. The Stafford craftsman was about to get his due. Just as it turned out, just had a very long fuse. Months bled into a year. The barn was transformed. I had hired a local crew, with Stan's recommendation, to help with the heavy lifting. The new roof, the structural reinforcements. But I did the detail work myself. I installed new windows, sanded and refinished the floors, and built new shelving from reclaimed wood found on the property. The space was no longer a dusty tomb, but a bright, airy, and vibrant workshop. Light streamed through the clean panes of glass, illuminating the rich grain of the workbenches and the orderly rows of tools on the walls. I had uncovered and carefully restored every piece of furniture my father had left behind. The Eleanor desk now sat in a corner, its wood glowing with a fresh coat of oil, holding the blueprints for my own first project. The settlement from Silas Croft's estate hadn't been a king's ransom. His lawyers were good, and much of the money was long gone. But it was substantial. It was enough to pay for the barn's restoration, to clear all my debts, and to set up a small fund that would allow me to work without the crushing pressure of needing to make a profit immediately. More than the money, it was an admission. It was a quiet, legal acknowledgement of the wrong that had been done to my father. It was his name, cleared in the dry, black and white language of the law. I spent my days now not just restoring, but creating. I started with one of my father's simpler designs, a small, elegant side table. I followed his plans meticulously, my hands slowly learning the language of the wood. The first saw cut was terrifying. The first joint I chiseled was clumsy, but I kept going. I remembered the feel of the hand plane in my palm on that first day, the sense of rightness. I wasn't my father. I didn't have his decades of experience, his innate genius, but I had his hands, and I had his heart. I discovered a patience in myself I never knew I possessed. I found a deep, meditative joy in the slow, deliberate process of turning a rough piece of lumber into something beautiful and useful. One evening I stood at the main workbench, the same spot where I had read his letter, and ran my hand over the finished surface of that first table. It wasn't perfect. I could see the small flaws, the marks of my inexperience, but it was solid, it was honest, and it was mine. I had made it. I looked around the workshop, my workshop, and I finally understood the nature of true inheritance. Mark hadn't taken everything. He couldn't. He had taken the things that could be bought and sold, the hollow symbols of a life we had pretended to have. He had left me with the only thing that was real, the only thing that was priceless, a story that needed finishing, a craft that needed learning, and a place to build a life with my own two hands. He had stripped me down to my foundation, and in doing so, had allowed me to discover that I was built of something far stronger than I had ever imagined. This barn looks like nothing to most people. To my ex-husband it was less than nothing, an asset so worthless it was invisible, but it was my salvation. It was a gift from a father who loved me enough to plan for a disaster he prayed would never happen. It taught me that the most valuable things we are given are rarely the ones that come with a price tag. So I want to ask you, what did you inherit that no one can ever take from you? Maybe it's not a barn. Maybe it's a skill your grandmother taught you, a quiet strength you got from your mother, a sense of humor that saw your family through hard times. Sometimes our true inheritance is a story that needs to be finished. A legacy of resilience, a talent that's been lying dormant, just waiting for the right moment to be awakened. The world can take a lot from us. It can take our homes, our money, our sense of security, but it can't take who we are at our core. It can't take the lessons we've learned, the love we've been given, or the strength we find when we are pushed to our absolute limit. That is the real wealth. That is the foundation that can never be repossessed. If this story resonated with you, if you believe that the most valuable things are the ones we build with our own hands and our own hearts, then please subscribe and join our community. This channel is for people who have been through the fire and are ready to rebuild, for people who know what it means to start over. Share your story in the comments below. Tell me about your inheritance, the one that can't be measured in dollars. I read every single one because I believe every story of resilience and rediscovery deserves to be heard. You are not alone in this. We are all here in our own ways, standing in the dust of what was,